The stars above Jupiter flickered, not with the twinkle of cosmic dust or the lazy shimmer of a gas giant's reflection, but with precision. Geometric flickers. Formation patterns. Something thinking behind the light. It began subtly, a perturbation in long-range observation data. A few solar physicists at the Kerguelen Deep Space Array noted the anomaly, first with curiosity, then with dread. When those same data packets arrived at LunaNet's distributed processing nodes, the algorithms flagged the signature as impossible. 10,000 kilometers of synchronized motion. Not asteroids. Not gravitational lensing. Not even natural. It was coordinated. It was coming. In less than 90 minutes, the entire solar defense grid went from yellow to blood red. The Valerii had entered Sol. They came without distortion fields or cloaking veils. They wanted to be seen. 58 warships unfolded from subspace like blades unseeing in slow motion. The smallest was nearly the size of Manhattan, the largest, a titanic dreadnought with mass readings that made no sense, eclipsed Io for 32 minutes. It cast a jagged shadow across the Jovian upper clouds, shifting storms that had raged for centuries. Valerii vessels didn't move like ships. They drifted like predators pretending to be debris. Their hulls shimmered in non-reflective alloys that changed shape depending on the viewing angle. They had no visible engines, no thermal trails. And yet they moved, cutting across the outer planets with chilling purpose. It wasn't an invasion. Not yet. It was a pronouncement. Every communications relay from Saturn's orbit inward was hit simultaneously, every wavelength, every channel. Earth's security layers flickered like candlelight. Even the Martian Republic's encrypted net, a source of pride and paranoia, was cracked open like an egg. The Valerii wanted the entire species to listen. And they did. Every screen on Earth, Mars, and the Belt went black. Every broadcast paused. Even the personal HUDs in orbital stations and lunar domes went still. Then the voice came. Cold. Serrated. Perfectly modulated. Neither male nor female. Not machine-like, but something ancient pretending to be civilized. The voice came in Mandarin, Arabic, Hindi, English, and 57 other major Earth tongues all at once. This is a declaration of galactic incompatibility. You are violent. You exhaust ecosystems. You proliferate without wisdom. You spread rage, not balance. In accordance with the Harmonium Edicts, your species is deemed unstable. You will be extinguished with regret, but with necessity. Submit now, and we will ensure a painless conclusion. Somewhere in a Valerii command archive, a doctrine glowed with relevance again. To preserve order, one must excise the chaotic limb before it infects the whole. Across Earth, reactions diverged like branches of lightning. In the bunker complex beneath New Geneva, the United Nations emergency session imploded. The Chinese delegation demanded isolation. The American bloc pushed for orbital readiness. The Pan-African Alliance walked out. The Martian colonies severed their uplinks altogether, citing planetary sovereignty. On the belt mining stations, data feeds lit up with conspiracy theories and old Earth war songs. In Lagos, a preacher screamed into a drone camera that the rapture had come, just dressed in metal and starlight. In Sao Paulo, teenagers graffitied "Come and Try" onto the walls of the Terran spaceport. Social media became a firestorm. Hashtag extinction notice. Hashtag Valerii go home. Hashtag we die loud. But aboard Fortitude Station, Earth's highest orbital defense platform, no one was panicking. Not yet. Colonel Ava Mendez watched the black curve of space from Observation Deck 3. She stood alone, arms crossed, a half-burnt cigarette glowing between her fingers. Regulations didn't allow smoking aboard command modules, but this wasn't the kind of day that cared about rules. The Earth hung below her like a fragile blue orb threaded with sunlight. Beautiful. Breakable. She exhaled smoke and hate in equal measure. Lieutenant Rao stepped inside, his boots making no sound on the padded floor. "Ma'am," he said quietly. "Orders from New Geneva are to stand by. Await diplomatic overtures." Mendez didn't turn. "Let me guess. They're sending a silver sphere, no weapons, nice glow, soft music?" Rao nodded. "A delegation vessel. Non-militarized. On course for lunar orbit. They want to establish dialogue." She turned slowly, her eyes like two fragments of obsidian. "That's not an olive branch, Rao. That's a pulse check." Rao shifted uneasily. "So you think it's bait?" She stepped closer to the projection display, staring at the red triangles hovering near Jupiter. "Not bait. Measurement. They want to see how much spine we have left. If we've broken ourselves already." He frowned. "Why not just attack? Why the theater?" She tapped her temple. "Legitimacy. They want us to choose extermination. Say the wrong thing, delay the right one, then they can scrub us clean and call it peacekeeping. She crushed the cigarette into the palm of her glove and dropped it into the recycler. I don't do mercy. Not their kind. The Valerii envoy ship arrived in lunar orbit 22 hours later. It was a crystalline sphere, unarmed, reflective, and so delicate it looked like a child's toy. It transmitted no threats, just a continuous message of opportunity for peaceful resolution. Humanity, in its infinite chaos, offered 100 responses. Some governments tried to negotiate. Others panicked. A few, like the Martian frontier states, powered up old war satellites. But the galaxy only remembered one response. A message. Simple. Unadorned. Broadcast in grayscale, 720p, and riddled with deliberate static. It looked like it was filmed in a bunker. Because it was. Colonel Ava Mendez. No rank insignia. No backdrop. Just her, in a battered flight suit lit by a single harsh overhead bulb that flickered once every few seconds. Behind her, exposed piping and scratched steel walls. She didn't fidget. Her eyes didn't wander. She stared straight into the lens. She didn't shout. She didn't plead. She dared. To the Valerii ascendancy, you call us unstable. You say we're incompatible. Dangerous. You're right. You think that frightens us? It's the only thing we've ever agreed on. You want to burn us down because we fight too hard, survive too long, and don't bend the knee to anyone? That's not instability. That's history. And if you've come to wipe us out, then come down and see what extinction looks like when it fights back. We are not peaceful. We are not rational. We are not kind. We are human. And we don't die easy. The message was supposed to be blocked. It wasn't. It spread. On Earth, it played in refugee camps, boardrooms, underground bunkers. On Mars, miners painted her words onto the sides of excavation rigs. In the belt, families gathered around old terminals just to hear the sound of a voice that didn't shake. But it didn't stop there. The message bled into galactic nets, into forbidden channels used by fringe species, into former Valerii-conquered worlds who hadn't heard open defiance in centuries. A minor species, a savage, irrational, self-destructive species, had looked extinction in the face and smiled. And across the cold dark of space, the universe shivered. It had expected fear. What it got was a warning. The transmission didn't just echo, it detonated. On 23 Valerii listening posts, automated filters flagged the message as subversive. AI sensors tried to choke it off. They failed. The message didn't spread along official channels, it burned through shadow nets, pirate bands, and stolen alien nodes with the urgency of prophecy. 1 minute it was a human face in grayscale. The next, it was etched into the memory of empires. On the Valerii core worlds, high advisors whispered about an anomaly, a species too small to matter, too loud to ignore. A new kind of contagion had been loosed, hope wrapped in defiance. Hope was dangerous. Hope had toppled thrones. Hope could not be allowed to metastasize. On Earth, it landed like a hammer. Within hours, Colonel Ava Mendez went from that lunatic with the bunker broadcast to something more. Some called her a martyr in waiting. Others, the last general of a dying world. But everywhere, in every city still breathing, her face gave people a reason to straighten their backs. She was the moment humanity stopped weeping and started reaching for its teeth. Fortitude Station became more than a weapons platform. It became a rally point, a myth under construction. Mendez didn't sleep. Her voice, sharp and uncompromising, cracked over the ops deck. Tell me about the Stygian net, she barked. The room buzzed with controlled chaos. Holograms of soul-spun overhead, targeting overlays, tracking grids, defense signatures flaring like wildfire across Earth's orbit. Every wall pulsed with pressure points. Rao, his voice graveled from exhaustion, leaned on the console. 14 killsats confirmed operational. 7 more dormant. Their reactors might restart with a jolt, but the capacitors are aging. Mendez didn't hesitate. Then jolt them. I want every inch of upper orbit rigged with enough firepower to make the Valerii second-guess their scans. He nodded. Already dispatched engineering crews to the yard. Found some old R-class silos intact. Pissed off relics, but waking up. She allowed the faintest smile. Around them, silence thickened as every officer listened without needing to be told. Nationality no longer mattered. Chain of command bent around necessity. People didn't wait for flags. They waited for purpose. NATO strategists plotted beside Martian Republic telemetry experts. Indian engineers aligned targeting solutions with retired Pan-African fleet navigators. Civilians repurposed satellite-scrubbing drones into kinetic interceptors. On every channel, one unspoken truth simmered. Humanity didn't kneel. It reloaded. In the rebuilt mountains of eastern Ukraine, an old silo cracked open for the first time in 30 years. Rust flaked from ancient rails as launch techs, most under 30, prepped missiles their grandparents had buried. One turned to his commander, voice trembling. "We really going to launch these?" The commander nodded. "We launched worse against each other. Now we launch them together." In Jakarta, engineers welded payload mounts onto mining craft, converting asteroid tugs into guided death traps. Their children painted names on the hulls in chalk. "Never again, Yuda's blade, Mama's voice." In Algeria, forgotten drone caches were rearmed. In Iceland, deep-sea sonar stations pivoted to track skyward. It wasn't unity. It was defiant entropy with teeth. And it was enough. The Valerii, watching from beyond Mars, did not sit idle. They deployed reconnaissance drones. Sleek, insectal, near-invisible machines with latticed wings that bent light around themselves. They slipped into Earth's orbit silently, sampling, observing, whispering data back to the fleet. One reached low enough to scan the rooftops of Nairobi before vanishing into plasma burned out by a pulse laser fired from a station that hadn't been on any registry for 2 decades. Another breached Martian orbit and pinged a civilian transponder only to be shredded by a hidden railgun buried under the southern pole coded to activate only if Earth origin sensors detected threat convergence. The Valerii war priests consulted doctrine. Aboard the dreadnought Suture's judgment, Archseer Kareth of the Harmonium Crucible studied the pattern shift in silence. His neural crests writhed with dissonant signal. He had overseen 4 extinction protocols. Precision. Clean logic. But Earth was erratic. He turned to his second, a young harmonist just out of ritual code training. The irregulars mobilize. They do not follow unity doctrine, but they converge. Chaos patterns, revered one? Karetha's upper tendrils laced into an old formation. His voice was dry. No. Worse. Intention. He turned back toward the system projection. They do not react. They create. Even the miners arm themselves. He recalled a line from the eclipsed Harmonium, a doctrine older than war. From silence comes order. From rage comes annihilation. When the lowly rage with reason purged the stars themselves. He whispered it to himself. And for the first time in a century he wondered if it would be enough. Mendez stood in Fortitude's war room, one hand on the table, the other curled into a fist. "They're still holding back," Rouse said, voice low. "No descents. No orbital shears. They're waiting. They think we'll collapse on our own," Mendez said. "That we'll eat each other before they spend a shot." She looked over the map. Then at Rao. Then through the wall at the stars. "Get me Ganymede command. I want the Martian Republic's fleet readings. Tell them to stop sitting on their titanium asses." "Ma'am, the belt's not responding either. Ceres is an open rebellion." She grinned. "Not pleasant. Good. Don't send them orders. Send them coordinates. Let them decide who to shoot." On Ceres, the old tunnels hummed. In Maintenance District K-12, a miner named Cass Brennan replayed the broadcast for the 4th time. The words weren't what got him, it was her eyes. Eyes that didn't blink when staring into annihilation. His daughter had died to a failed environmental lockout 4 years back. No one answered the emergency signal. Earth had been too busy arguing resource tariffs. He hadn't cared about Earth since. But this was something else. Mendez hadn't offered apologies or diplomacy. She'd offered teeth. "We die loud," Cass said aloud, wiping oil from his hands. Around him, others nodded. An older engineer named Freya stood, joints cracking. "I'll get the gantries online. Power grid's a mess, but we'll bleed the reactor if we have to." Rika, barely 20 and already too old for her years, looked up from a buried munitions catalog. "I know where they hid the warheads." Cass cracked his knuckles. "Then we're done hiding." What followed wasn't coordination. It was contagion. Across Ceres, men and women who hadn't believed in Earth, in flags, or in salvation began whispering a new word. Strike. On Earth, military planners scrambled like ants on fire. In Alaska, the abandoned Thunder Chariot, sleds, EMP-launched microbursts were reassembled and dragged onto frozen runways by civilian tractors. In Mumbai, data brokers unveiled Project Chimera, a drone swarm AI once shelved for being too erratic. Mendez authorized its reactivation with a shrug. "Give me madness that flies," she said. "Better unpredictable than extinct." In Lagos, a street gang hijacked an old orbital uplink and patched it directly into a former communications satellite. They renamed it Voice of the Ugly Planet. And they broadcast Mendez's message 24/7. "This is our sky," they said. "And if you come for us, bring gods." Even the children refused to stay silent. Aboard the refugee barge Elpis, orbiting Lagrange 4, 10-year-old Nadia took a charcoal stick and drew Mendez's face on the side of a ration crate. Beneath it, she wrote in blocky letters, "We stay angry. We stay loud." Her mother stared at the drawing for a long time, then turned toward the ship's transmitter array and said, "Let's give her our voice." Every species the Valerii had judged before had gone quietly. Humanity wasn't quiet. It was building traps in the sky, rearming its forgotten dead, whispering fury across the vacuum, and waking ancient weapons with cracked fingers and bloodshot eyes. The spark had become fire, and now parts of the galaxy were starting to burn with it. The first shot wasn't fired from Earth. It came from the belt. Somewhere beyond the orbit of Mars, in the cold shadows past Ceres, where the sun was no more than a distant star, the old railjack platform known as Station Helix shuddered back to life. Deep in a shaft lined with ancient mining slag, rusted conduits sparked as dormant systems woke from a 30-year sleep. The place had been abandoned since the collapse accords. Most thought it was dead, forgotten. Its coordinates had been stripped from navigation logs, its control relays buried under generations of ash and insulation foam. But it hadn't been forgotten by everyone. Inside the buried command dome, lit only by flickering emergency strips and the static crackle of reactivated relays, Cass Brennan stood at the launch console with cracked knuckles and grease-stained sleeves. The room stank of old copper, ozone, and sweat. A clamshell screen blinked amber, showing targeting data pulled from half-patched sensor feeds across the belt. "Coil temperature?" he asked, voice rough. Climbing, Freya called back from the power station interface, half buried in a nest of coolant lines. "We'll breach safe thresholds in 60 seconds. Probably burn the rails, buddy." "We don't need safe," Cass growled. "We need loud." Rika sat cross-legged beneath a communications terminal, her fingers buried in a fiber nest of signal routers. The youngest of them, barely 20, but her eyes were sharp with fear-shaped focus. "Trajectory plotted," she said. "Recon drones still loitering near the K-Pass corridor. It's not even cloaked. They don't think we're a threat." Cass stared at the flickering red dot on the display. That drone, smooth, silver, and silent, had hovered there for 3 days, silently watching. Recording. Judging. He clenched his jaw. "Lock it." "Locked," Rika said. "Target window in 45 seconds. Freya wiped her forehead with an oil-streaked sleeve. "The payload's not clean, Cass. I had to bind the antimatter core with an old pulse cap from a mining fuser. This thing's not going to be tactical." Cass smirked. "Good. Let him know we're still primitive. That we build fire from rocks." Behind him, a dozen other belt miners, engineers, and drifters stood in silence. None had military ranks. None had authorization. But every one of them had lost something, to Earth's neglect, to Martian bureaucracy, to the Valerii. No one moved. Then someone whispered, "For Earth." Cass pulled the lever. The railjack howled. There was no launch music. No ignition flare. Just a groaning thunder that rippled through kilometers of rock. The warhead, a Frankenstein monstrosity of old defense torpedoes, scavenged gravitic fusers, and an unstable antimatter capsule, screamed into the void. Aboard the Valerii observation cruiser Vinthra's Grace, Subseer Aliket floated within the song-filled chamber, conducting her 5th recursion chant. The harmonics had just begun to stabilize when the alert glyphs bloomed. One flashed crimson, then vanished. Telemetry disruption. Sector 9A, local anomaly detected. Her voice cut off as the entire forward sensor grid ceased to exist. The detonation didn't pierce. It didn't slice. It unmade. The antimatter pulse incinerated the recon drone in a flash of uncontained energy, vaporized 200 meters of surrounding debris, and sent an expanding wave of electromagnetic distortion across the sector. Near-field comms were scrambled. Sensor feeds went blind. Gravimetric spikes registered a localized anomaly. To the Valerii, the strike was not logical. It was emotional. A flare of unfiltered defiance, launched with rage and welded with desperation. The belt was not silent anymore. Cass didn't see the explosion. The feed died before the detonation registered. But when the sensors blacked out and Helix's consoles stopped receiving updates, everyone in the chamber knew what it meant. The room stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then someone clapped. Rika laughed, high and nervous. "It worked. It actually, Cass, we hit them." Cass exhaled like he hadn't breathed in days. But the moment didn't last. He looked at the launch console, fingers still resting on the lever. "That wasn't a shot," he said. "That was a line in the sand. They're coming now." Silence fell again. Then Freya spoke, low and hard. "Then let him come." Cass nodded slowly. "Broadcast it." Within seconds, the kill confirmation shot across belt relays. Heliostrikes. It wasn't a code. It was a message. And across dozens of hollowed-out rock colonies and pressurized tunnels, it spread like radiation. Heliostrikes. And now it was war. On Fortitude Station, Ava Mendez sat alone in her quarters reading outdated satellite maps of Earth. Not because she needed to, but because she liked remembering where this all began. The ping came soft, encrypted. A tie-beam packet from Deep Space Relays. She opened the file. It was rough, grainy video. A launch. A heat bloom. A sudden sensor blackout. A still frame of a red marker going dark. She played it twice. Then smiled. Rao entered as she stood. Something happened? She held up the tablet. The belt lit the match. Helix just launched. First confirmed strike. Rao whistled. Bastards actually did it. No, she said. They started it. She turned toward the war room. Prep Chimera. I want swarm readiness in 2 hours. Ma'am, those drones aren't fully stabilized. We haven't even mapped half their behavioral loops. She looked back at him. Eyes like burning stone. We don't need stability. We need chaos. Deep beneath the Andes, buried hangars hissed open. The Chimera program, blacklisted by 5 administrations, roared to life with a shriek of synthetic logic. Each pod was the size of a coffin, matte black and cold to the touch. Inside, swarms of semi-autonomous drones twitched, their hive minds patching together from incomplete routines and half-insane algorithms. They had been designed for asymmetrical planetary warfare. They had been caged. Now they were waking up. Engineers backed away as the systems hissed and clicked. One technician whispered, God help whatever they're pointed at. The squad commander checked his pad. The first wave was primed for exoatmospheric launch. Mendez's voice came through the uplink. Test nothing. Launch everything. On Mars, the fleet was splitting. The Martian Republic, proud and independent, had argued for caution. For non-engagement. For neutrality. But soldiers who wore red dust on their boots had different ideas. Commander Zaya Trant stood before her crew on the bridge of the Red Providence, hands behind her back. She looked into their eyes, one by one. You didn't sign up to babysit Earth. Neither did I. But look out there. That's not Earth calling. That's humanity bleeding and pissed. A murmur passed through the bridge. I won't order you to follow me. But I'll burn alone if I have to. Her exo cleared his throat. You won't be alone. Zaya nodded once. Turned back to the helm. Kafit to Central Command. Prepare course change. She opened her comms wideband. This is Providence. If you see fire in the dark, follow it. Then she burned hard toward the Valerii formation. The Valerii did not anticipate this. The Harmonium Doctrine predicted 3 primary human responses: submission, panic, or disorganized retaliation. In the past, other species had folded. The threats vanished in a single cycle. The Dullen begged and were archived. The Kurai detonated their own oceans before surrendering. But humans didn't beg. They didn't fold. Instead, they broadcast declarations. Jammed frequencies. Struck from asteroids. Broke ranks and rewrote orders. Archseer Kareth reassembled the choir of war priests. He spoke aloud. They are not responding. They are creating. He stared at the new war map. Dozens of human forces, uncoordinated, unpredictable, feral, were igniting across the system. He raised 2 of his neural crests in alarm. This is no longer a judgment. This is a collision. Everywhere, humans stopped waiting. On Mercury, a solar observatory slingshot a kinetic coil into orbit, an old sunmass relay core retrofitted into a rail cannon round. Dr. Juno Malik watched the launch from behind radiation shielding, whispering her father's name as the coil cleared atmosphere. In the Pacific Ocean, a decommissioned nuclear sub stirred beneath black water. Captain Elias Ford, gray-bearded and long out of uniform, punched in old keys with trembling fingers. The launch code still worked. He laughed until he cried. In orbit above New Delhi, Air Commodore Tanvi Rao climbed back into a fighter she hadn't touched in 15 years. The flight deck crew saluted her in silence. As the canopy sealed, she whispered, for the ones they missed. Humanity wasn't launching a counteroffensive. It was lighting the fuse of a war only one side realized had already begun. The Valerii responded exactly as their doctrine demanded. Pain calibrated. They didn't retaliate with emotion. They retaliated with procedure. At 2:17 Sol System Coordinated Time, the first kinetic strike fell. A tungsten rod, 10 meters long and wrapped in nanocrystal casing, accelerated to orbital velocity from a Valerii carrier. It struck the surface of Earth near the Namib Desert. There was no warning, no light, Just a thunderclap that shattered the air and gouged a 10-kilometer scar into the rock. They didn't target cities. That came later. First, they erased the quiet places. Biodiversity vaults, historical archives, outposts of science, sites of shared memory, as if to say, you will not rebuild. You will not remember. Then came the suppression waves. Electromagnetic pulses targeted ancient communication satellites still used by refugee fleets. They struck non-military relays that served medevac beacons and disaster recovery networks. Not to kill, but to isolate. On Mars, a listening post hidden beneath Olympus Mons, a relic from the era of the Martian Commonwealth, was atomized in a single vertical burn. No warning, no negotiation, no announcement. The message was clear: you struck first. Now feel the discipline. The Earth wept fire. Ava Mendez stood in the war room aboard Fortitude Station, watching live feeds flicker and die, one by one. Red flares blinked across the holomap of Earth and its surrounding orbital network. Target pattern, she muttered. Rao brought it up. His hands shook as he traced the spread. The red dots weren't random. They were surgical. Not power stations. Not logistics, he whispered. They're hitting cultural anchors, libraries, DNA spires, ruins we preserved. They're not trying to beat us militarily. They're trying to erase what we are. Mendez stared for a long moment. Then she said, tell Chimera Swarms 1 through 5 to reorient. We're no longer guarding cities. We're hunting launch signatures. I want their vision cut. Their hands burned. Ma'am, if they dig in. She cut him off. Then we dig deeper. We tunnel through hull, through skin, through doctrine. Burn the bone if we have to. A junior officer swallowed hard. They're moving toward the equator now. We have about 9 hours before the next wave. Mendez leaned forward until the edge of the war table lit her face in sharp, cruel lines. They want to teach us pain? We taught pain how to crawl out of the womb screaming. In the belt, death came in claws. Valerii drop needles, ceramic cylinders filled with high-pressure atmosphere and triple helix war beasts, fell into rotation across minor stations. These were not soldiers. They were synthetic predators, bred for instinct and guided by faint, preloaded directives. One such pod slammed into the northern shaft of Station Helix. Cass Brennan's team had 5 minutes warning. Enough time to grab weapons. Not enough to prepare. Freya tried to reinitialize a pressure seal. The creature moved faster. One sweep of a scythe limb and she was cut in two. Her last act was to hit the emergency lockdown, sealing off the entrance behind her corpse. Rika had pulled propellant tanks from a shuttle's secondary bay. She built a flame arc with stripped wires and a spark coil. The flame caught. The creature screamed. A high, tearing metal screech as its outer layers boiled. But it didn't stop. The war beast crushed her leg between 2 sets of claws. She dropped, shrieking. Cass didn't freeze. He emptied 3 proximity charges into its torso at point-blank range. The blast tore the tunnel open. He didn't wait to see if it died. He dragged Rika, half-conscious, bleeding, through 4 kilometers of shaft, pausing only to activate every lockdown protocol they had left. Doors slammed shut. Lights dimmed. Pressure shifted. They finally reached the south chamber. Another crew had rigged med units. Cass didn't speak. He set Rika down, held her hand. Stay with me, he said. She didn't respond. You hear me, Rika? Stay mad. That's how we win. Elsewhere in the belt, improvisation became gospel. Mining rigs turned into magnetic net traps. Chemical lures led war beasts into vacuum gulches. A lone rock hauler on Vesta, rigged by a grieving engineer, detonated its reactor beneath a Valerii patrol. Before it blew, it sent one last message. You came for cattle, found wolves. On Earth, fire met frost. In the frozen reaches of northern Canada, a biodiversity vault burned. Inside were samples of every known tree, fungus, and flower still surviving in the Anthropocene. But the vault's watchers endured. An elder named Inanna stood beside the ruins, frost on her eyelashes, shotgun in her hands. They thought we were stories, she whispered to no one. Now they'll see we're warnings. Old caches were opened. Bone-handled blades, cryo-dipped spears, hunting rifles sealed since her grandfather's time. When the first Valerii probe touched ground, it found not soldiers but guardians. The kind who never left. It didn't survive the hour. They didn't just kill it. They dissected it. Sent its scream into the sky. Anana climbed the tallest pine and lashed the probe's torn limb to its branches. "Let them see it hang," she said. "Let them mark this ground." They broadcast coordinates across every free channel. And waited. Pain circled the stars. The Valerii saw it. So did the galaxy. And on 50 subjugated worlds, once silenced peoples leaned toward their screens. And for the first time in living memory, they didn't whisper. They said it aloud. Humans do not just endure. They evolve inside the pain. In the marble-glass halls of the Harmonium High Conclave, Archseer Kareth stood before a burning screen. The footage from Vesta looped. A war beast pinned in stone, twitching, shrieking, dying. He rewatched it 3 times. Not because he doubted, because he recognized it. Long ago, the Valerii had fought the Zarn, a species so chaotic they imploded before the war truly began. But this wasn't madness. This was clarity refined through suffering. "They do not adapt away from pain," Kareth whispered. "They shape themselves around it." He turned to the shadows of the war chamber. "This is not extermination. This is metamorphosis." A tactical interface opened. The signals weren't military. They were civilians, rogue broadcasts, pirate nodes, encrypted pulses bouncing across systems. Unified by nothing but memory and fury. "Escalation," Kareth breathed. And behind him, the chamber dimmed. At 0300 hours Earth time, over the North Atlantic, Chimera Swarm 1 rose from the deep. The drones came like wasps born of nightmares, each unique, each wrong. They didn't form ranks. They emerged. Jagged, fast, silent. One Valerii cruiser over Lisbon went dark. No explosion. No warning. Just gone. In 24 hours, 6 more followed. Valerii carriers scrambled. They shifted formations. Jamming protocols went live. Nothing worked. The Chimera didn't fight like fleets. They fought like neurons with teeth. One drone streamed its kill feed live. A Valerii tech officer screaming as the hull cracked from inside. Rao saw it first. Mendez stepped up behind him. "We built demons," he whispered. "No," she said. "We let them wake up." Across the earth, humanity answered. Jakarta teens hijacked satellite relays. A Kenyan university converted a telescope into a pulse-burst array. In Morocco, an old weather station broadcast the word, "Rise," in every known dialect. And then, across all Valerii channels, came 6 simple words. "You wanted pain. We're listening." In a bunker beneath New Delhi's ruins, Air Commodore Tanvi Rao finished her checklist. Her strike fighter wheezed when she activated the main core. Older than the war. Older than her scars. She looked to the sky. "I've waited long enough." Outside, the horizon glowed red. She climbed in and launched. The Valerii fleet adjusted its doctrine. They were done with calibration. Done with containment. The loss of 7 cruisers to rogue swarm logic and asteroid-borne strikes was no longer tolerable. Now came Requisition Protocol Alpha, total suppression, no exceptions. It was not retaliation. It was extermination with dignity. Over 50 ships broke formation and fell toward Earth. They formed a spearhead column that glowed like the spine of a god, each vessel a city-sized weapon of unbroken war tradition. From the icy flanks of Ganymede to the fire-fed valleys of southern Mars, the column could be seen. The dreadnought Thrinax will led the descent. Its hull was a monolith of living metal, covered in layered serum organic plating that shifted with atmospheric pressure. The internal systems were biological, neural fibers wrapped around gravitic spines, breathing coolant like lungs, a command center grown rather than built. It had leveled civilizations, shattered moons. Once, it drowned an ocean world in its own rising tide by flipping its core. But Thrinax had never fought a species that smiled when it bled. Fortitude Station's comms lit up in amber and red. Threat confirmed pulses flickered on every deck screen. 12 minutes to atmospheric breach, said Lieutenant Kara, knuckles white around her console. Mendez stood still. Confirmed descent trajectory, she ordered. Rao's voice was brittle. Direct polar arc dropping hard over the South Atlantic. Mendez didn't blink. Get me Providence. In low Mars orbit, Commander Zeatran stood before the cracked forward display of the red Providence. Sparks danced from torn junctions. The ship's spine creaked under gravity stress it was never designed for. Half her crew was patched together with medfoam and anger, and still they stood ready. The call came. Mendez's voice was iron. Inbound, primary dreadnought. I need a corridor before we lose sky. Zaya wiped blood from her lip and replied with the faintest smile. We'll dig your corridor. You just make sure hell walks through it. Copy, said Mendez. We're sending ghosts. Zaya nodded. Then let's make room for the dead. As Threnax plunged into Earth's thermosphere, its hull began to sing. The heat shielding adjusted automatically. Microorganisms embedded in its surface metabolized friction into energy. Dozens of defense nodes activated, rotating like petals toward threats yet unspoken. Then the Chimera came, not in waves, not in formation. They flowed, a swarm of black shapes, asymmetrical and shifting mid-flight. Some rode high-altitude jet streams. Others latched to falling debris and slipped inside. One burrowed through an unsealed exhaust port using gravity knives grown from its own mass. Inside the dreadnought, the Valerii reacted with holy detachment. Until the first scream, and then another, and another. Sub-Priest Melkareth clutched the command spine with 4 limbs, his chance disintegrating as the floor beneath him warped from impact shock. Static poured into the mind link. Protocols failed to execute. His last thought was not fear. It was confusion. Why did it feel like they were being hunted? Then the ceiling came down. On Earth, the sky over the Atlantic turned gold and white as orbital fire rained. Mendez's strike teams activated. They weren't soldiers in a conventional sense, they were students turned killers, doctors turned engineers, refugees turned tacticians. Their weapons were modified mining drills, sonic lances, hullbuster javelins, repurposed plasma lines. They didn't care about style, only blood. From collapsed subway tunnels in Kiev, urban commandos launched grappling rigs that latched onto descending support craft. They climbed into the belly of the beast. In the shattered lower levels of Sao Paulo, elevator shafts were reprogrammed into vertical kill cannons, firing magnetized steel beams upward into low-hovering recon drones. The war was no longer global. It was intimate, one-on-one, face-to-face, rage to rage. In the heart of Manila, 9-year-old Tomas Alvarez hid beneath the broken concrete of an old sports dome. He clutched a datapad to his chest. His parents were above, running toward the med station when the first orbital lance struck. He couldn't hear, not after the pressure wave, but he saw a shadow move, metal clicking alien. The drone scanned the rubble. Tomas tapped his pad, activating a bootleg signal disruptor his father had taught him to build. The drone stuttered, then froze, and Tomas grinned, bloody and deaf, but grinned. On the slopes of Kilimanjaro, a Valerii dropship landed with imperial grace. It was met by a coffee farmer with a homemade rocket launcher, a Maasai ranger carrying an old bolt-action rifle, and a retired astronaut wearing a flight suit turned battle harness. The Valerii underestimated the air. The humans had buried resonance charges tuned to the altitude. When the ship opened its side hatches, the air sang. The harmonics tore through the unshielded troops inside, rupturing auditory centers. They dropped in convulsions, bleeding from their auditory folds. The humans didn't cheer. They advanced. Every inch the Valerii took required bone. Human bone. Valerii bone. They fed the mountain their blood. In the skies above the Amazon, Red Providence roared into low orbit. Her hull rippled from atmospheric shear, but her guns held steady. Target lock on Threnax will, called Zaya's gunner. Primary lance cycling. Zaya slammed her fist against the command seat. Fire. All of it. Don't leave them time to pray. The lance fired, A beam of blue-white light punched with magnetic resonance. It struck three knacks while dead amidships. The dreadnought shuddered. Then, Mendez gave the signal. Now! 3 Chimera Swarms detonated inside the enemy vessel. Its core erupted like a volcano. The sky cracked. Chunks of burning architecture rained across the ocean. An earth bruised, buried, bleeding roared. But no one on the ground celebrated. They moved. Fast. Strike teams scavenged shattered Valerii armor. Dismantled weapons. Rewired AI cores. Salvaged battlefield drones with their fingertips blistered and eyes sleepless. Children carried stripped cable and learned what each connector did. Engineers recited old circuit diagrams over fallen friends. Doctors performed field surgery beside heaps of broken machines. They swapped tools mid-sentence. No hesitation. In Nairobi, a girl named Aisha reprogrammed a crashed Valerii flight node to act as a scout. Her uncle watched in silence, then laughed until he cried. In the black void just beyond Neptune, Valerii command regrouped. The high executor of Sector 9X demanded status. Only one word returned from Threnax Will's final transmission. Unmaking. It wasn't a tactical term. It was a cultural one, used only when an enemy behaved in ways that could not be categorized. Kareth read it 5 times, then closed the file. "We did not bring fire," he said quietly. "We brought fuel." On Earth, in the ruins of old Istanbul, Mendez stood beside the wreckage of a downed Valerii atmospheric piercer. Her coat was torn. Her hands blistered from gun oil. Rao approached her. He looked at the sky, now quiet. That was their big move. And it failed. "What do we do now?" She looked to the east, where red sunrise touched burning clouds. "Now?" She cracked her neck. "Now we go to them. We take a fleet, a message, and we show the stars what extinction fears." The war was no longer about resistance, not about survival, not even about winning. Now it was transformation. And hell? Hell wasn't something the Valerii brought with them. It was something humanity had been perfecting for generations. Hell was ours, and now it marched. The stars were silent, not in peace, but in awe. 53 Valerii vessels had entered Sol. 18 now drifted as carcasses torn, hollowed, or burning in slow orbit decay. 9 were missing, presumed destroyed in ways the Valerii language had no precise words for. The rest had retreated to the outer shadows of the solar system beyond the heliopause, nursing wounds they did not understand. What the Valerii could not name, the galaxy had already begun to whisper. Humanity does not resist. Humanity invents fury. And across every world where subjugation had worn grooves into bone, that whisper began to change things. In the soot halls of Jernak Prime, enslaved engineers leaned closer to forbidden relay taps. They passed old resistance codes in broken machinery and painted Earth's solar glyph onto hangar walls. In the acid fields of Chrysolis, the exiled warrior clans of the Tharna, once broken in spirit, watched smuggled footage of a Valerii dreadnought's collapse. They replayed it in silence. Then, without a word, they began sharpening weapons buried for generations. And in the free orbit of Vega 6, where merchants, smugglers, and spies traded in secrets heavier than gold, the words Red Providence and Chimera Swarms were worth more than entire fleets. But Earth didn't want currency. Earth wanted clarity. And Mendez was ready to speak. The broadcast room beneath Fortitude Station still reeked of ozone and burnt mylar. It had survived 3 near strikes, 2 decompressions, and 1 attempted boarding. The walls bore patches like scars. The air recyclers wheezed with age and grit. It was not beautiful, but it was alive and functional. Rouse stood at the signal deck, hands trembling as he adjusted the last frequency range. Before him blinked a map of known relay points, some official, others hijacked, many held by allies they didn't yet know. "Signal clean," he said. "We're hitting every band from Sol to Eridanus. Some of it's going to bounce around pirate nets. A few of the big players, Ethran Union, Tuvra Reach, they'll intercept." He looked to Mendez. "We might even wake up the observers." Mendez didn't respond. She stepped into the projection ring. No makeup, no filtered light, just her flight suit, scorched, stitched, and blood-streaked. She carried no rank insignia, just a simple patch that read, Earthborn. The recording light blinked, then stabilized. Across thousands of worlds, orbitals, and void ships, screens and holos shimmered to life. And Mendez began. We are the children of a broken world. Her voice was rough, not rehearsed, real. We were born under poisoned skies. We built cities on fault lines. We fought each other for the right to exist, and we learned. We learned how to survive collapse, how to rebuild after burning. She paused. And when you came, when the Valerii descended with doctrine and fire, we greeted you with the only thing we had left, our will. You thought us fractured. You were right. You thought us primitive. You were wrong. You came expecting conquest. You found conversion. The galaxy held its breath. We are not peaceful. We are not perfect. But we are ours. We are made of cities that drowned, towers that crumbled, oceans that boiled, and still we rose. Her eyes burned now. You want to judge us? Judge what we've done? Come. Do it with fire. We'll answer with thunder. A beat. Long measured. Or we can build something new. From the wreckage. From the ash. Her voice dropped. We are tired of dying. But we are very good at it. So choose. Be better with us. Or burn. And then, quietly. Your move. The broadcast spread like a detonation in vacuum, soundless but absolute. On the silent mining moons of Tesh 9, workers gathered in old or lifts to replay it in loops. On Calvareth, where enslaved minds were hive-linked in behavioral nets, the collective briefly went silent for the first time in centuries. On Ethran diplomatic corps, ambassadors demanded full transcripts within minutes. Some read it weeping. And in pirate clusters around Pulsar 2286, fleet captains changed their transponder IDs to Fortitude class. Some called it bravado. Others called it a pledge. In the doctrine chambers of Valerii Prime, the elders met in darkness. The chamber was a circle of iron veins and silent grav anchors. 12 sat on thrones made from alloyed star cores. Kareth stood at the center, motionless, the full transmission playing one final time. When it ended, the silence stretched. Elder Chauvel finally spoke. This is not noise. It is warning. They rewrite the archetype. They refuse their assigned place. Another elder growled. They mock harmony. They desecrate structure. Kareth lifted his head. No. They define a new one. He turned slowly, voice sharper than any blade. The humans are not outside the doctrine. They are the consequence of it. Whispers followed. They are proof of failure. Or proof of evolution. Kareth stared at the stars projected above. If we continue to strike them as we have, they will not die. They will evolve into something worse. No one moved. Then Kareth said one last word. Parley. And the stars seemed to shudder. Back on Earth, Mendez stepped from the transmission ring. Her shoulders sagged. The adrenaline was gone. She sat beside Rao in the half-lit room and took the tin mug he offered her. He raised his own. Think they heard us? She looked out the viewport where a new shipyard was being welded together in Earth orbit. Hulls scavenged from war. Systems groaned from Valerii wreckage. She smiled. I think they're still listening. And across the stars, for the first time in recorded history, humanity was not the ones being watched. They were the ones being followed. The galaxy did not stay quiet. 3 days after Mendez's broadcast, the first message arrived. It came from a solar drift net above the rogue planet Iskelvi in the forgotten corner of the Cygnus Shroud. The net wasn't supposed to transmit, it was a relic used for energy capture by a dead civilization. But someone had rebuilt it, hijacked it, and used it to send a message directly to Fortitude Station. It contained only 5 words. We heard. We will rise. They came one after another. The Ethran Unity sent a delegation, not through diplomats, but through deserters. 3 of their war-blooded officers defected with stolen cruisers and offered themselves not to Earth's command, but to its cause. They arrived with hulls bearing scorch marks and patched systems. Their message was simple. Your flame reached us. We brought steel. They bore no gifts. No protocol. Only blood-coated combat logs proving their allegiance and the severed tendrils of Valerii command corps they had slain in ambush. Earth took them in. The Kelri Arcwalkers responded next. Through a visual packet of mathematical poetry, they described Earth's rage as a necessary corrective force to galactic entropy. They pledged no warriors, only wisdom, doctrines of chaos becoming order. Mendez accepted it with a nod. Even gods need philosophers, she murmured. Then came something no one expected. An invitation. From the observers. The observers were myth to most. They did not interfere. Did not speak. Only recorded and archived civilizations until they fell into silence, and then they filed them away. They had been seen only a handful of times, always watching from impossible distances. But now the galaxy's librarians wanted to meet with Earth. In person. A rendezvous point was established in orbit over the red giant Epsilon Scorvi neutral ground. One ship. One voice. Mendez chose herself. Rao tried to argue. Send a proxy. A council. Let someone else say. No, Mendez said. They didn't speak to a government. They responded to me. He exhaled. Then we make sure they hear you all the way back through time. The Nameless Fire, Earth's first purpose-built interstellar vessel since the war began, launched with 3 escorts and a dozen silent promises. Its hull had been forged in the yards over Sao Paulo using recycled wreckage from the orbital battle. Its navigation AI was jury-rigged from scavenged Valerii targeting code. Its frame carried pieces of the red providence, a sacred alloy that hissed when heated. And its command deck bore the same flag stitched onto Mendez's arm, Earthborn. As they approached the red giant, the observer ship appeared as if from a fold in space, not cloaked, not warped. Excluded. A vessel shaped like a Mobius twist, its material unreadable. No heat. No light. No life. Rao stared through the viewport. I don't think that's metal. I think it's concept. Mendez didn't reply. She stepped forward. Alone. And was pulled into light. Inside, the observer was not a form. It was a presence, fractaled and endless, like a cathedral collapsed into an idea. It did not speak in sound, but in cognition, directed thought that pressed against her skull like cold wind. You have changed the flow. Mendez stood in a field of floating memories, images of Earth, war, joy, cities crumbling and rebuilding. It watched her through them all. She answered without flinching. We changed ourselves. The galaxy's just catching up. Your species is unpredictable. Dangerous. Fragmented. Correct. You are not sustainable. We were never meant to be. We're meant to evolve. Pain is our architect. The observer shifted, the air around her became full of echoes. Entire civilizations collapsed in stasis. Frozen ruins. Archived screams. You will burn yourself. And the stars around you. Mendez stepped closer. Maybe. But maybe we burn the right things. Silence. Then. We will not archive Earth. We will watch it. She leaned forward. Then you better keep your eyes open. Elsewhere, the consequences of the broadcast deepened. On Jernak Prime, the engineers turned insurgents activated dormant gravity wells, traps meant to snap orbital Valerii transports from the sky. They weren't soldiers. They were builders. But angry ones. On Chrysolis, the Tharna warrior clans launched a test strike on a Valerii observation outpost. No survivors. No broadcast. Just silence and painted symbols in the shape of a rising flame. In the slave pits of Calvareth, the hivelink was hijacked. One node pulsed a single image into the collective, a human face. Mendez's face. Then a scream. Then freedom. At the diplomatic core of the Ethran unity, debate became rebellion. The humans have shown us the future, one admiral said. No, said another. They've shown us what we used to be before Fear One. Arguments turned into challenges. One high arbiter was thrown from the skydeck. By week's end, the Ethran fleet split. Nearly 1/3 turned off their transponders and realigned their star charts towards Sol. They called themselves Echoes of Fortitude. When the Nameless Fire returned to Earth orbit, the atmosphere in Fortitude Station had changed. Hope no longer flickered. It burned. Children wore shirts printed with Mendez's speech. Old veterans from forgotten wars sent their medals back to be melted into command chairs. In the Martian drylands, wind farms were converted to long-range communication relays. In Lagos, a cathedral was converted into a war room. In Tokyo, they launched a seed vault into orbit, not to preserve Earth, but to plant it on other stars. Everywhere, humans built things. Things with purpose. Things that pointed outward. Mendez walked the halls of Fortitude alone that night. Rao caught up with her near the observation deck, where Earth glowed below, wrapped in a halo of industry. You did it, he said. She didn't answer. They're rallying to us. You saw the reports. That wasn't just a broadcast, it was a spark plug in a storm cloud. She looked at him. Then we better make sure the lightning strikes the right target. Across the galaxy, the stars no longer watched humanity. They spoke. They invited. Challenged. Warned. Reached. Because now they understood. Earth was not looking for sanctuary. Earth was looking for momentum. And nothing burns brighter than a species with nothing left to lose and everything left to give. Earth did not ask for alliances. It made them choose. In the weeks that followed Mendez's broadcast, ships bearing the sigils of 22 non-aligned species entered the solar system. Some were small vessels barely held together with magnetic welds and desperation. Others were graceful, curved things made of stone glass or crystalline memory foam. A few bore weapons, but most brought only eyes, ears, and the quiet, potent ache of civilizations waiting far too long for a reason to rise. Each of them arrived alone, but none of them left that way. They came not to speak to Earth's governments, not to kneel before flags or formalities. They came to hear the voice that had cracked the galaxy open. They came for Mendez. The Council of Fractured Suns convened aboard the half-ruined ring station Varela's Edge, a forgotten orbital built before Earth even reached the moon. It hung like a cracked crown between Saturn's rings and the dead husk of Relay Gate 11. Once it had been a listening post, then a refugee station, then a pirate den. Now it was something new. The floors were rusted. Air was barely clean. Light flickered and groaned against stained bulkheads. But into that ruin came diplomats, war-worn veterans, resistance leaders, and scholars with neural scars. They stood in the main chamber under a canopy of hard radiation shielding and broken star maps. Mendez sat at the center, not elevated but grounded. Her chair was repurposed from a lifepod shell. No one was allowed to sit higher than her. That was the rule. She was flanked not by Earth's elite, but by survivors. Cass Brennan from the belt, leg replaced by carbon struts and braced with magnetic shock anchors. He carried the scars of Helix's burning shafts and the silence of too many funerals. Zaya Tran, once of the Red Providence, now a figure of fire and fury. Her face was half-burned from the dreadnought engagement, her voice deeper now, as if smoke had taken permanent residence in her lungs. And Anana, the elder from the Yukon vaults. She wore no armor, no robe, just a patchwork parka and a necklace made from the antennae of a fallen Valerii scout drone. When she spoke, even the artificial languages slowed to listen. They didn't speak of peace. They spoke of terms. Each species would retain sovereignty. No empire, no thrones. Earth would lead, but not as overlord. As example, the fire starter, the knife in the dark, the shield in the breach. There was tension. The Vaskai, three-eyed beings with amphibious vocal cords, hissed doubts about centralizing military command. The Zulvith wanted every human technology shared openly. The Uralths, fleshless, crystalline logic beings, demanded predictive models for the war's end state. Zaya answered by showing them footage. The wreckage of Threenak's will. The hull split in slow orbit. Chimera Swarm footage. Black rain over the Atlantic. Screams caught by helmet cam. The still image of a Valerii war priest falling through his own neural throne. Then Cass spoke. Those were our first steps. We've stopped bleeding. Now we start building. With you. Or without. They signed. The Pact of Earth was born not from ink, but in ash. But alliances have cost. Valerii counterstrikes intensified. They didn't need fleets. They used calculated terror. On Havith 3, a moon world filled with neutral terraformers and atmospheric processors, the sky turned red at sunrise. A transmission dish rebroadcasting Mendez's speech blinked 3 times. Then it vaporized, along with the city beneath it. On Drell Station, a medical hub long protected by neutrality codes, the Valerii released gray psi, a biochemical mist that unraveled synaptic structures over minutes. By the time Earth's relief teams arrived, the crew was either dead or permanently dreaming. In the void, Valerii warprobes dropped bone-coated warnings onto Allied vessels. The fire you feed will consume you. Earth's response was not silence. It was escalation. Chimera Swarms adapted. They weren't built to learn, but they did. By mid-cycle, Swarm Variant 8 had developed autonomous self-fragmentation protocols. One swarm split into 37 autonomous kill cells and rejoined via SENTAG signal. The Valerii called it the shadow genome. By the second month, Earth deployed gravitic spike rounds, metal seeds wrapped in magnetic detonation fields. They didn't explode. They twisted. Valerii hulls crumpled like fruit crushed underfoot. Saboteurs, human and not, slipped through relay gates thought-sealed. They carved messages into command pillars with acid blades. One read, "We are what you made. Now undo us if you can." But there was one strike Earth could not stop. Calvareth, the slave-mind world. A world of 8 billion consciousnesses linked by Valerii neural mesh. It had begun to rebel. Mendez's image had spread through the network like fire in dry grass. Identity fragments had begun to form. Resistance. Names. In the orbital command lattice above Calvareth, Valerii neuropriests stood in silence. The eldest among them, Hurithkal, stared at the growing anomaly on the neurograph. They speak to each other in symbols we do not recognize. Another voice, thinner. It is spreading too quickly. Self-replication of identity schema. Contagion of autonomy. Then it must end. The command was issued. The lattice fired. 8 billion minds, blinking with nascent dreams, went dark. Mendez did not speak for 3 days. She ate in silence, slept on the floor, refused briefings. On the 4th day, she walked into the war chamber barefoot, carrying a smooth obsidian stone. She held it up. This was sent by a child from Calvareth. He had no name, just hope. We carry him, too. She placed the stone on the center console. No one dared move it. We do not forgive them. She met every eye. We do not forget them. She paused. We become the voice that replaces theirs. No one argued. The Pact of Earth was ratified the next cycle. Ethran cruisers integrated with human command software. Kelri mathematicians began translating battle doctrine into predictive chaos maps. The Zulvith sent planetary engineers to reinforce the Martian underground. In orbit, Fortitude's ring grew. Every species that signed added something: steel, software, culture, memory. A ritual was born. When a new world joined, they brought a relic of pain. A stone, a weapon, a name. They gave it to Earth, and Earth kept them all. As the ratification ended, one delegate remained standing. Ilyavan of the Vaskai approached the table. Her species had once been enslaved, their songs banned by Valerii doctrine. She placed a broken instrument, shaped like a spiral shell, beside the Calvareth stone. This sang for my people once. We forgot its notes. May your voice remind us. She bowed, and Earth bowed back. By year's end, Fortitude's Hall of Names contained over 10,000 objects. Every one of them a promise. We remember, we fight, we rise. And every time they looked toward Sol, they no longer saw a world clawing for survival. They saw a world that had once been on fire, and chose to ignite the stars instead. The galaxy had watched humanity claw its way out of the grave. Now it watched them draw their sword. The Valerii High Conclave, once serene in its doctrine of inevitability, broke its silence with a single edict. Burn Sol. The order rippled across sectors. Within hours, entire fleets broke from station. Neuropriests synchronized pulse drives in ritual silence. Hive Lords intoned the old verses of doctrinal correction. Valerii war factories flared with renewed output, constructing hull breakers, core piercers, and subjugation barges in a blur of pure, practiced hate. They did not see it as war. They saw it as final maintenance. To them, Earth was a deviation, a fracture in symmetry, a wound that refused to close. And they would cauterize it. Mendez stood in the command deck of the Vigilant Forge, the first flagship constructed by the Pact of Earth. Its hull carried human blood memories in the steel, engraved at the molecular level by resonance etching. Its power core pulsed with Ethran fusion harmonics. Its navigation array whispered in Kelri symbology and adjusted based on predictive entropy waves. It was not just a warship. It was a promise. Below her, Fortitude's ring glowed with docking beacons and signal flares, hundreds of ships from dozens of worlds, each one refit, repurposed, and reborn. The ring itself spun slow, steady, humming with the rituals of construction. Welders from Chrysolis, Martian engineers, Uroth crystal weavers tuning resonance spines. The new fleet had no uniform, no one color scheme. Each ship bore its scars, its symbols. One Zulvith war spiral read. Your voids made us silent. We return as thunder. Rouse stood beside Mendez, running his fingers along the console's engraved edge, the names of every fallen packed world. He stopped at Calvareth. They're coming, Ava. Mendez didn't nod. She stared into the screen where the Kuiper belt shimmered. Let them. The Valerii fleet entered Sol through the Kuiper threshold. They did not sneak. They did not hesitate. They announced themselves, broadcasting system-wide pulses that erased comm relays and injected binary warnings into every channel. You chose extinction. We are its instrument. The armada stretched over half a light minute. Its silhouette eclipsed starlight. High barges shaped like planetary spines. Neurosphere cruisers laced with radiant coils. Pulse void hullbreakers humming with dread. At the front floated the dreadnought Ulsekvarn, a former ice comet turned into a living citadel. It pulsed with cryolich fire, its flanks adorned with preserved trophies, hull fragments from species long extinguished. They believed Earth would scatter. Earth did not scatter. It surged. The Battle of Sol began in silence. First came the Chimera Swarms, not launched, but unleashed. From the shadow of Neptune, from the hollow tunnels beneath Enceladus, from the carved craters of Oberon. Each one different. Each one wrong. They had no standard form anymore. Some swarms were jagged storms of reflective razors. Others moved like wet smoke, flickering in and out of phase. They spoke in waveforms learned from the Kelry, and when they moved, they sang a synthetic hum that resonated with subharmonic defiance. Next came the packed fleet. Vascae plasma skimmers danced across Saturn's rings. Zulvith shard carriers twisted into battle form, becoming living torpedoes. Martian-built flak drones lit the outer dark with bursts of electric red. Ephron command frigates pulsed with recursive shields, flaring like petals under fire. And at the center, the Vigilant Forge, not the largest, but the loudest. Its forward array emitted an unencrypted broadcast. "This is Fortitude Station. You are not welcome." When the Valerii realized they had not arrived at a battlefield but an ambush, it was too late. 7:42 Universal Time Coordinated. The Vigilant Forge took the first dreadnought hit, a pulse lance across its starboard flank. The impact vaporized a segment of the hull and ruptured 5 decks. Emergency fields snapped into place. Atmosphere roared into the void. Mendez held the rail. "Redirect hull phase. Rao, give me eyes. 2 more cruisers incoming. Boarding pods incoming, make that 8 pods." She bared her teeth. "Let them board. They wanted to see us up close." The Valerii breach pods lanced into the forge's underbelly like fangs. Inside, strike teams waited. Cass Brennan stood at the front, carbon leg braced, rail spear locked into his shoulder. He didn't speak. He charged. The first Valerii through the breach screamed as the spear shattered its pressure shield. Behind Cass, belt-borne fighters surged, miners, engineers, rig divers, all wrapped in blood-sealed armor. No orders. Just purpose. Fighting inside the forge wasn't war. It was ritual. Outside, Zaya Tran led the vanguard strike. She flew the Red Providence like a blade through gas and metal. At 11:03 Universal Time Coordinated, she pulled 5 Valerii interceptors into a gravity sink over Ganymede, then slingshot her vessel back into Jupiter orbit. The high barge followed. It was a mistake. The Providence dropped low into the storm's edge, weaving through pressure pockets. She armed the core, issued no last words, and dove. The explosion turned Jupiter's eye inside out. Atmospheric shock echoed for hours. From Luna, it looked like a star had blinked. The Valerii high barge did not return. The battle stretched over 16 hours. It reached the Earth-Moon corridor, arced across Mars' orbit, and spilled into the asteroid belt. At one point, a Zulvith shard ship sacrificed itself to puncture a command cruiser. Ephron carrier beacons swarmed enemy nodes with entropy loops, confusing Valerii fleet coordination. Every battlefront became a memorial. Above Ceres, an old mining rig transmitted Mendez's broadcast on loop. It was vaporized, but not before 1,000 packed ships changed heading toward the explosion. 23:12 Universal Time Coordinated. The packed fleet surged. Not in formation, not with clean lines, but in fury. Every ship carried a relic. A name. A piece of the hull. These were not tactics, they were revenants. And at the center, the Vigilant Forge burned its way forward, engines bleeding plasma. Mendez stood on the bridge, ash on her cheek. Broadcast wide. Rao's fingers danced. The message went out. For Calvareth. For Haveth 3. For the child who sent the stone. She leaned forward. Light them up. And Sol burned. The stars would remember it not as a battle, but as the moment the galaxy understood what it meant to make war against Earth. The Battle of Sol did not end with silence. It ended with reckoning. The Valerii fleet, what remained of it, scattered. Some tried to retreat through the Kuiper threshold. Others turned on each other, fragmented by doctrine collapse and the horror of what they had witnessed. Neural chains burned. Fleet minds cracked. Dreadnoughts that had once sung doctrine through subspace fell, eerily mute. Aboard the shattered hull of Va Rethduin, a Valerii war priest clung to a failing uplink. Blood seeped from his memory folds. "Harmony is structure," he whispered. "Structure is control. Control is. The transmission cut out. Alsekvarn, the dreadnought that once crowned the Armada, broke apart in orbit over Neptune, its last signal a fragmented scream in 12 dialects, none of them Valerii. The galaxy, watching, recorded that scream. Not as a warning. As history. And Earth stood scarred, cratered, bloodied, but undefeated. The ring of fortitude was cracked in 3 places. The Vigilant Forge drifted with half its systems offline. The Hall of Names had taken a direct strike, its glass walls shattered, its archives exposed to vacuum for 6 minutes before emergency shutters sealed them in. But the lights stayed on. And the stars listened. In the aftermath, the Pact did not celebrate. They remembered. Across 1,000 systems, remembrance took shape. On Ephron Prime, monks walked between quantum mirrors, humming sorrow through transluminal threads. On the ice plains of Chrysolis, soldiers lit pyres made from collapsed cryomines, watching flame flicker against aurora skies. The Zulvith gathered in their shard hollows and split portions of their armor membrane shards offered to Sol's orbit, drifting like crystalline snowflakes into the void. On Luna, humans and allies raised a wall. Granite imported from Earth. Reinforced with Kelri lattice resin. Each name carved by hand. No automation. No shortcuts. The carvers were volunteers, some veterans, some children of the fallen. It took 26 days. And still, more names came. At the center of the wall, beneath a vault of starlight, sat a single stone. Obsidian. Worn smooth. The one the child from Calvareth had sent. It was never moved. It became the cornerstone. Mendez spoke not from a throne or dais. She stood atop the outer ring of fortitude where scorched plating met vacuum. Her boots clicked against metal once burned by pulse lances. Only a field of shielding separated her from the cold death outside. A single camera drone hovered. No edits. No filters. Just her. We were supposed to die. She looked down, then up. That was the plan. Their plan. The plan the galaxy has followed since before our skies turned black. She turned slowly, gaze sweeping the expanse of stars that surrounded her. But we didn't die. We rose. We remembered. We became something else. Something they couldn't predict. Couldn't model, couldn't erase. Her voice shook. Now we carry the weight of those who can't speak anymore. From Calvareth. From Haveth 3. From New York before this all began. She reached into her coat and placed something on the deck. A stone. Scorched. Chipped. Black as night. It joined the dozens others left by visitors since the wall had risen. Only ash can speak for the dead. And we are ash that walks. Her voice steadied. This war is not over. She looked to the stars. But they know now. The Valerii. The Watchers. The cowards. The tyrants. A long pause. They know what happens when you try to erase a species that refuses to forget. She looked to the drone. This is not a victory speech. There's no such thing. She turned her back. This is a funeral. And across every outpost, every ship, every broken relay station that still carried Earth's pulse, silence held. For the first time in a generation, the stars did not echo war. They bowed their heads. In the weeks that followed, rebuilding began. The Martian drydock project recommissioned 7 packed ships lost in the Battle of Sol. The Uralth began synthesizing memory-encoded alloy, a new material that carried neural trace echoes, allowing every ship to remember the sacrifice of its crew. On Jupiter's moons, the remains of the Red Providence were gathered. Zea's name was etched into the crust of Ganymede in letters the size of cities. Ephron architects wove time harmonics into Saturn's rings, creating a living monument that played the sound of the battle's final hour once every year. But humanity did not rest. Because not all signals had stopped. At the edge of Sol's heliopause, near a field of ancient Valerii wreckage, scavenger drones found something. A fragment. Black and silver. Burned at the edges. It pulsed with encoded memory. Voices twisted and looped. Images flickered. One message repeated beneath the layers of static. We were wrong. They are not deviation. They are divergence. And they will not stop. The message had no sender signature. It wasn't meant for the Valerii. It wasn't even meant for Earth. It was a warning. Sent beyond the rim. In a region of space no chart recorded, something answered. Not with words. With motion. A structure, massive, spined, drifting for millennia, lit up along its veins. It had no crew. No bridge. It did not think in singular minds. It remembered wars older than galaxies. It had archived extinction. And deep within its vaults, an echo returned to life. A voice. Last flame, still burning. Then silence. The structure turned. Slowly. Surely. Toward Sol. And in the dark beyond the stars, a new chapter waited to be written.